Today on the show, I have Dr. Jason Mogonye, who is a sports medicine physician and has probably worked Pee-wee to pro like I have across all of the different areas of sports. We were just talking about rodeo. So all the different areas that athletes and really active people are existing. So Dr. Mogonye, I'm going to let you tell everyone a little bit about your background.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. My name's Jason Mogonye. I'm a primary care sports medicine physician in Fort Worth, Texas. I've been practicing now for around 15 years as an attending physician. I've, like you said, covered just about everything from Pee Wee football all the way up to college athletics, professional rodeo, semi-pro sports. So I've seen the gamut of age groups and injuries and all that type of stuff. So it's been a good time.
Hey, you know what? It's never boring.
Never
Ever.
at all. That's true.
So one thing about sports, I always tell them, like, it's never boring. There's always something going on. Always,
And
always,
every
always.
time you think you've seen it all, you see something new.
Well, I appreciate you coming on because as a sports dietitian, when we talk about young male athletes, be it middle school, high school, teen, however you want to classify them,
Mhm.
obviously muscle gain, bigger, stronger, faster. How do I grow as fast as possible comes up. And so as a sports dietitian, I'm always getting asked, like, how can you fuel? How can you do this? And we know that nutrition can do a lot when it comes to the athlete. However, one of the things I like to remind parents and coaches is that depending on the stage of puberty and development for this athlete, they could eat you out of house and home and they may never gain the muscle that you want them to gain. And I think that that's a hard thing because obviously just girls and boys, like they mature at different ages. And sometimes you never know when that's going to happen. And that can be frustrating to athletes, parents, and coaches. So I'm really excited to kind of dial in on this topic with you. I've got my notes right here so I can stay on track. So, first thing, let's kind of start off with just how does puberty affect athletic performance in teen male athletes?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we need to do is talk about like what puberty is, right?
Yes,
So
100%.
yeah, puberty is really the progression towards sexual maturity. If you
Mhm.
really want to nail down the topic of puberty, that's really what it's talking about. But when you talk about sports performance, it really kind of gets more towards those two phases of growth, body getting bigger, size differences, and then a maturation factor that goes along with that growth that kind of takes into account that emotional, physical, and
Mhm.
even sexual maturity side of things. So puberty kind of takes all of those into account. And that growth part of it is the thing that everybody wants. They want to get
Yes.
bigger, they want to get stronger because they think bigger and stronger equals faster and better. And that's where you really have to pay attention to it is and how you go about growing. What
Right.
is your expectation of growth and all of that kind of stuff.
Totally. Yeah, it's such an interesting, and like we said, it happens on such a different scale for people that I know it's frustrating from a timing perspective. Okay, so growth and development, great lead in. When we talk about growth and development, what are some of those key milestones during puberty that can affect an athlete's performance, their ability to play certain sports, or not really certain sports, but their sporting abilities, let's say?
Sure. So I think if you've ever walked through a middle school or hung out in any kind of
Mhm.
middle school environment, you've seen a group of kids that are all, 11 or 12 years old. And
Yeah.
you may have a kid that looks 8 years old, and you may have one that looks 18 years old. There's such a huge gamut in those age groups. And historically, we've thought, oh, well, these kids that develop earlier, that hit puberty earlier, because it could happen as young as 10, but it may happen as late as age 16. Those that hit earlier, they always seem to be considered athletically superior because they are a little faster, they've developed more. The problem is once you've started playing sports as a child and you do hit puberty, your body changes. You
Yeah.
get taller. So your center of gravity changes, the length of your arms and your legs change, how you can respond to certain stimuli changes, and it takes your neurovascular system, your brain and your nerves some time to catch up with how fast your body grows. And so just that in and of itself, just the actual growth spurt or what we call peak height velocity can make a big change in how somebody starts to perform because they could do it before and they'll probably be able to do it after, but there may be this 2 year time frame where they're having to get used to that body change.
I've seen so many kids where you like look at them and you can tell they have gone through that and like maybe they haven't filled out and you can see they have a frame for muscle, yet they have none yet. Or they're just not as super coordinated. Like, they grew because some of them grow so quickly. And it's
Yep.
like, wow, okay, they're so linky. It's almost like they don't know what to do with themselves. Or I've seen baseball
Yep.
pitchers that their arms are so long. It's like, what are you going to do about that?
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden I'm big, tall Bambi. I can't even walk straight. My feet are too big for my body. My legs are too long all of a sudden. And that can get frustrating for sure.
I have a question. Like when you talk about like with parents and you hear about like the Tanner stages of development and we talk about like those milestones, does that relate to this at all? Because that's a phrase I hear a lot in the sports, kind of in the
Sure.
sports world when we're talking about young athletes.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Just like it would in women, it does in men
Okay.
or in boys. So the harder part with boys is the Tanner staging is harder to see, right?
Right.
In girls, they start to develop breasts, which,
Right.
while covered, they're just easier to see.
Right.
With boys, it's not the same. And so typically when we start talking about that peak height velocity or that growth
Mhm.
spurt that we
Yeah.
typically see in adolescence, that's usually around Tanner stage 3.
Okay.
And for most boys, that starts to correlate with the development of pubic hair. And so that's great and that's a good thing to know, but you're not going to know that.
Right.
You're not going to be looking at your child that way, right?
Right. Right.
And so you'll start to notice other things. They may start to develop like a little bit of a mustache, or when they were a little bit baby faced before, their face may get more slender,
Mhm.
or they may really shoot up and get thin. And so they look skinny, even though they're not
Yeah.
losing weight, they're not gaining weight because their body's putting fuel into growing taller and not
Yeah.
bigger. So usually Tanner stage 3 is that kind of growth spurt. The the next part of that Tanner stage 4, and really kind of towards the end of Tanner stage 4, is when that peak strength or muscle phase hits.
Okay.
And so for boys, it's kind of towards the end of Tanner stage 4, going into 5, which is fully mature, where the muscle gain, the size gain really starts to happen. And so that can be frustrating too, as they start to grow. Let's say they start Tanner stage 3 at 2. It may take them 2 years to get through Tanner stage 3, and then another 2 years to get through Tanner stage 4. So they've been growing for 4 years and not putting on any muscle.
Yeah.
And they're like, why can't I put on any muscle? And your body's just not ready to do that yet. It happened to me. My parents thought I was infected with worms or something because I couldn't put on any weight. It was ridiculous, but look, I've managed to do it now. But
Isn't that funny how that happened? Well, I like for me, I was 5'4" by the time I was 9. I'm 5'6" and I am 44 now. So that means I have grown 2 inches since age 9. And people are like, what? I'm like, I just grew real fast. People thought I was going to be a giant. And then I'm like,
that's
nope,
crazy.
stayed right here. So yeah, it happens. And I see my niece doing that. She's growing really tall. And
Really?
my brother-in-law is like, maybe she's going to be tall, odds against her. And I was like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
I've seen this before.
Well,
So
you
it's
can't outcompete
interesting.
your genetics, right? I mean,
Exactly.
your parents are going to be what your parents are going to be. Your genetics are going to
Yep.
be what they're going to be. I grew an inch after I got in college.
Yeah.
So I was kind of one of
Yes.
those quintessentially late bloomers. So there's a whole gamut of things that can happen,
Yeah.
and all of them are within normal. That's the thing but parents get worried when it doesn't happen right away.
Mhm. Okay, so this is a good lead in because I was going to ask you about like what is the age per se or
Yeah.
age-ish, maybe we'll say that you can that you I'm going to say typically because I know it varies widely, but that
Hmm.
you typically start to see young male athletes be able to really start put on muscle mass. Like they have a frame and then because I can see it, I'm like, oh, that's a good quarterback frame or whatever, because I can tell they have
Hmm.
the structure. But is there an age that parents can kind of go, okay, around that age is like when we're likely to see that?
Yeah, I would say from the time you start noticing that you think they're going through puberty. So when you're starting to have that conversation with them that maybe you should start wearing deodorant,
Yes.
or, we should probably talk with dad about how we're going to learn how to shave and all that kind of
Uh-huh.
stuff. About 4 to 5 years after that is probably when
Yeah.
they're going to start being really efficient at adding muscle. That doesn't mean they can't add strength. I mean, even young kids can add strength to their
Yeah.
body. It's just that their muscles are not going to hypertrophy. They're not going to get that big bodybuilder look. They're not going to get those big
Mhm.
biceps and things like that because their body isn't geared at that moment to produce that. It's still working on getting the bones longer, getting
Yeah.
taller, getting the tendons and the ligaments and all that other stuff to catch
Yeah.
up. And once you get there, once you kind of end that real growth, then your body can focus more on putting in muscle. And that's really when the testosterone production kicks up, is at that end of
Yeah.
Tanner stage 4, beginning of Tanner stage 5. Your body hair pattern starts to change quite a bit. And that's really when the muscle bulk starts to happen.
Yeah, I always tell parents like they've got to be producing testosterone if enough. If they're not, like they could eat and eat and eat. And I find they never get, it's like a little, I don't know where it's going. I'm like, well, it's going somewhere. It's giving them energy, but that's about it. They're not putting on
100%.
muscle. So with testosterone specifically, like how does that affect both muscle development and then physical performance for an athlete? Because you see that I was going to say this summer I was at a quarterback camp and it was age 9 or 9th grade to 12th grade. And same thing. It looks like there's 9-year-olds in there. Then there's people that look like they should be in college. And it's, it's funny. Their age range isn't that different, but they're what they
Right.
look like. Testosterone production has to be totally different at those different age ranges.
It absolutely is. So early testosterone production is really designed to help your body grow and to help with sexual maturity. It really doesn't have a whole lot to do with muscle formation. It really has to do with, can your testicles have to grow, your penis has to grow, you have to start producing sperm, you have to start doing all of these things to gear your body up to be sexually mature. That's really what puberty does again.
Right.
The muscle development and bone density gain are really kind of secondary benefits that, kind of historically have made men bigger. And that part of it is kind of what we take advantage of from the physical performance side. So once your body has gotten to where it needs to be bigger and sexually mature, then it can focus on that muscle mass. And so testosterone is huge for muscle mass. It's why people use testosterone to cheat. That's why it's not legal in most sports, is because it works. It works really well.
Yeah.
So if you take it, it's going to work, but it also has bad side effects if you overuse it. So it's one of those things where your bone density gets stronger, your muscle mass gets bigger, typically, your tendons are stronger, your ligaments are stronger, because it has to be able to handle that bone versus muscle combating against each other. The muscle pulls on the bone. If the tendon's not strong enough, it's going to snap right off. And so
Interesting. I
all of
never really
that's
thought about
affected
it
by
like that, but
testosterone.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So then how does that both, I guess, testosterone production and then what you were saying about muscle and bone development and growth, how does that affect what types of like strength training exercises should be done and maybe the volume of said strength training exercises
Sure.
for male athletes in that puberty growth and development timeframe?
Yeah. So I think one of the popular misconceptions is that kids before puberty shouldn't do strength training. And that's just not true. Kids that are young, even very young, 5, 6, 7 years old, can do strength training. They're just not going to be doing like Olympic weightlifting.
Right.
They can do things like push-ups or pull-ups or like, dips or things like that. And really in that time frame, it's just a matter of getting them used to the technique and teaching them proper technique and safety and being around that environment, because little kids, they wander, they don't always listen. Once they become mature enough from an emotional and from a listening standpoint and a coachability standpoint, kind of in that like 10, 11, 12-year-old range, still pre-puberty, but getting a little older, then you can start adding the weights in. It's not going to be heavy weight. They can still get stronger, no doubt. Their muscles will get stronger. They're just not going to get bigger because, again, they don't have that testosterone to do it. But you can still teach them technique, add different techniques, add more complicated weights, more complicated exercises and activities. And then as they start to hit that puberty, you just build on that as they begin to mature. And when they continue to prove that they can handle that load and not become injured, not have terrible soreness or issues with technique or lose their technique because the weight's too heavy, you can continue to advance that on. And then you'll notice once they finish that last stage of puberty and they start moving into that Tanner stage 5, they'll put on the muscle bulk. It's going to happen. And that's where it's really important to kind of identify that going through, because that's when you really want to hit that nutritional side of it really hard and be like, okay, here's where we go with protein. Here's where we go with other things. And so just watching for that progression, and everybody's a little different. I wish I could be like, oh, it happens at 10 and then this happens at 12, but everybody's different. You just have to pay attention to it and really focus on safety. I can't say that enough. Even in the younger kids, even in the kids that are in high school, even in the college age kids, one of the things I've noticed, especially at the high school level, is there's a lot of kids in a weight room and there's not a lot of supervision. It's really important for them to
Yeah.
learn how to lift correctly before
Yeah.
they learn how to lift heavy.
Well, and I was going to ask you about injury prevention. So when you're talking to like parents, coaches, I mean, obviously at lots of high schools, we're in Texas, there's
Mhm.
strength coaches, but that is not the case across I was in a state recently, and most of the high school coaches are volunteers. They don't even
Right.
have to, I was
They don't
like,
even work at the
whoa,
school.
whoa,
Yeah.
they don't even have to be teachers. And
Yeah.
so obviously in some areas it's heavily, you're in Florida and Texas, you're probably gonna find strength coaches at those younger levels. Other schools you may not. So what should coaches, parents, kind of like know about injury prevention and or look for? Because one of the things I've also found when kids are in this growth and development stage, which we can help with fix with nutrition, is they're often fatigued. And many times
Mhm.
it's because maybe they're not eating enough calories to support the growth, development, puberty, all the things that are going on. And so
Mhm.
obviously in my experiences, when athletes are more fatigued is when they do things like trip, hurt themselves or whatever that is, because just lack of energy. So what should we be telling parents, coaches at this level to look for and or be aware of for injury prevention?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things are important here about that Tanner stage 3, that peak height velocity or that growth spurt that we're talking about. When the bones are growing really fast, the downside to that is that the growth plates themselves become the weakest part of the system. The tendons are still strong, the ligaments are still strong, the bones are still strong, but that growth plate in the bone is the weak link because it's cartilage, it's not bone, because
Yeah.
the bone has to grow from somewhere. And so when you notice a kid hit a growth spurt and they really start shooting up, you may have to moderate their volume, or you may have to change a little bit on the types of things, maybe not such high ballistic things, maybe a little bit more low impact for a while until their body catches up with that. You can't put everybody in a bubble, right? You can't just tell
Right.
a kid to stop playing sports, but you
Right.
certainly need to be aware of the fact that the growth plates can be a problem. Because if they come to you complaining of, my ankle hurts, an
Mhm.
11 or 12 or 13-year-old kid doesn't really sprain their ankle that often. You really have to pay attention to the growth plate. That's the weak link in the chain. And the other thing I think that really need to pay attention to is starting early with the technique. I'll go back to the safety side of it.
Mhm.
Kids will do what they're taught to do, right? Well, at least you hope they do what they're taught to do
Yeah.
if they're doing it right.
Right.
So when they're learning how to do these types of things, when they're early on in their development, early on in their weightlifting or working out career, teaching them how to do it right, listening to their body, and understanding that they have to take some time off. They can't do everything every day. Your body's just not designed to do that at that level for that period of time. You have to let it catch up and recover.
Okay, so this you've triggered a thought in my head because a lot of times you see athletes that age playing multiple sports and they
Hmm.
are moving from one sport to the next sport, school sport to club sports, or they've got, football at school, select baseball after school, a hitting practice of this and that. What about
Hmm.
from that overtraining perspective, like in regards to injury prevention? I mean, again, I think it's going to vary a lot,
Sure.
but for parents to know, like, how much is too much? Obviously, we can help fuel that with nutrition. Just be like driving your car around a lot. You keep putting more
Mhm.
gas in it, but there's got to be a risk when it comes to volume of training, not just strength training, but practices, any type of training.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a huge risk. There's been, I don't know how many studies done about overtraining and
Yeah.
burnout and success at a later age, especially when it comes to sports specialization. We see this, I think, most commonly in baseball. This seems to be the one that we study the most because everybody wants to be a MLB pitcher, and that's great. And so at the age of 11, they start a training program to become an MLB pitcher.
Mhm.
And the odds are not in your favor if you specialize as a pitcher in baseball at the age of 11. Your likelihood of injuring your elbow, having to have Tommy John surgery or something like that is insanely high. So the recommendation from most of the academies now is don't specialize in sports until at least the age of 16. That doesn't mean don't play multiple sports. That just means
Right.
don't specialize in one, right? You
Yeah.
shouldn't be on 3 different baseball teams over the summer. You shouldn't be playing baseball year round. Maybe
Mhm.
you play basketball in the winter. Maybe you play football in the fall and then you play baseball in the spring. Or you play soccer in the fall and you swim in the winter and you play baseball in the spring. Because cross training is really important.
Yeah.
If you want to be an athlete, if you want your kid to be athletic, they should play more than one sport while they're kids. Let them try lots of different things. It actually helps them in the long run,
Yeah, I've heard that.
not to just specialize in one sport.
Well, I'm sure it also trains coordination and balance and just different types of.
Absolutely.
My nephew is 6, and so he's kind of into this, like, play football, flag football, and then baseball, and then soccer. Let's see what you
Yeah.
like, or
Yeah.
or just like what they naturally kind of gravitate to. And it was so funny. My sister posted a video of him on a bike and, riding a bike. And it took my niece so long to, get the coordination. And
Hmm.
she took off the training wheels. He starts going. I mean, one lap around the block, he looks, okay, he's going to make it. Next lap, the kid's like standing up on his bike, speeding down a hill. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, he got there fast. I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's amazing how they do catch on and learn. And I know just like the variety of training, but I definitely see high volume being huge, huge problems with those younger athletes, which is where people like me need to come in to help fuel them. I know. So, and then
Yeah.
I guess one of my last questions would be, I think it's interesting because obviously some male athletes have you've already talked about this, a more delayed growth and development,
Mhm.
and some have really speedy. And so a lot of times I get asked by parents, the younger ones might have an extra layer of body fat, because they just haven't really, they've got this extra, they look like little, kids, they have a layer of body fat.
Sure.
Then you've got kids that are the same age that, look like they should be on a bodybuilding magazine because they're so muscular and whatnot. So how do you kind of help parents understand like what's happening there, what they should be doing? I'm always like, you just kind of have to wait this out. Like, let's make swaps, improve nutrition, but you kind of have to wait it out. And so, what would your recommendation there be for parents? And then also, what about when those two kids are playing each other in a tackle sport? Like, I always
Yeah.
joke if you have a really light DB and a really heavy tight end, like this isn't going to go very well because they're not gonna be able to keep up. Like even in the NFL, I'm like, if that DB is 10 pounds too light and that tight end's on the heavy end, he's gonna drag the DB with him.
Yeah.
So
You
with
can't overcome the
coaching,
physics.
yeah, exactly. So with coaches, like how do you deal with that with some of those really mismatched body shape, size scenarios? Kind of a
Yeah.
loaded
So
question, but
sure. But I think the way I start with parents is typically speaking, and I'm not talking about obesity. Obesity is a
right,
different
right, right,
animal.
right.
In fact,
Yes.
I think we're having this conversation because we want to fight obesity with exercise. I
Mhm.
want kids out playing. I want them
Yeah.
exercising. I want them involved in sports. I think it's important for them to be involved in sports. It teaches them way more than how to run and lift and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But when I'm talking to parents of kids that may be what we call a late bloomer or a little bit baby faced because they carry a little extra body fat in their face, I
Mhm.
usually talk to them in a way that it's like, look, these kids right now are storing up their energy in the form of fat
Yeah.
because here in about 6 months to a year, they're going to take off like a wildfire
Yeah.
and you will not be able to get them fed enough to keep up with the amount of growth. And they're going to use that body fat and they're going to grow and they're going to lose that baby face and they're going to get more of an adult look about them. And then they may stop growing for a while and they may put some more fat on and then they may grow again. That's kind of the
Yeah.
nature of kids growing. They round out and they shoot up and they round out and they shoot up. And I think that helps parents understand that it's going to happen. Now,
Right.
are there kids that don't have that ability, that have growth hormone deficiencies and things like that? Absolutely. So if you're worried about your kid being too small, talk to your physician, see if there's an evaluation that needs to be done. But a vast majority of kids are just going to round out and then they're going to grow up. When it comes to that competition level between two desperately sized people, I
Mhm.
think youth sports does this a really good way, especially like Pee Wee football. They
Mhm.
have size restrictions. So for
Ah,
age, they have an age and size restrictions. So like in Pop Warner football, you can be up to a certain age and up to a certain weight. If you're over a certain weight, you may have to go up a level as long as it doesn't go too high on the age. If you're under a certain weight, you can play down a level because of the size, as long as you're not too old to do that. So they take that safety into consideration quite a bit.
yeah.
Once you get to the junior high and high school level, you don't necessarily have that
Mhm.
protection.
Yeah.
And so I think it's up to the coaches to be smart about who they put up against each other in practice,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like a contact, like a heavily
Yeah.
contact sport.
Yeah.
Uh, it's hard to protect against that. Like I said, you can't beat the physics.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, at the younger ages, when they haven't grown yet, they may feel a little bit left out because they're not going to get to do as much. But eventually, they're going to fill in and grow, and You know, small but mighty is a real thing. I've seen some smaller guys take out some big guys. So there's hope yet, I
So
promise.
true. So true. So I think my final question would be, and you were kind of alluding to this, and I want to know if it's the same. So I had a conversation with Dr. Jane Chung. She's a sports medicine physician at Scottish Rite Orthopedic Sports Medicine up here where I live. And we were
Mhm.
talking about female athletes, right? So we were really dialing in on the female athlete. And one of the things that she was recommending was in really looking at, in case female athletes are losing too much weight, looking at their growth curve. Like
Mhm.
maybe they're 10% for height and weight, but they've always been 10% for height and weight, and they're following that curve. So you
Mhm.
don't really worry about it. If they're 90%, but they've always been 90%, they're
Right.
following the curve. She was like, she said, really where you start to kind of draw concerns for females. I'm just curious if this is the same as males, because parents are looking at these growth charts of pediatricians, their whole
Right.
every year when they go to the doctor. Is
Mhm.
that similar with males? Like, are there more jumps between like high and low, or should it be following a pretty specific curve?
For the most part, boys are going to follow the same type of growth. It's
Okay.
a different curve. It's a little bit
Right.
different look to it,
Yeah.
but they will follow their curve. You know, so if they're in the
Percentage
50th
wise.
percentile, they typically stay in the 50th percentile.
Okay.
Again, the weight can fluctuate a fair amount. You know, you may
Mhm.
get a kid that gets a little chunkier at some point and he doesn't really get any taller. So his BMI technically goes really,
Right.
really high.
Yeah.
But then the next year he grows 4 inches and doesn't really gain any weight. So the BMI falls back down and he jumps back on the curve. So a little deviation here or there is not super concerning.
Okay.
If they are falling off of it consistently, though, I would say that's concerning, especially when it comes to height in the younger ages.
Mhm.
You know, kind of 10, 11, 12 plus or minus if they haven't hit their growth spurt yet. But young kids, if they're falling off that height curve or falling off that weight curve, that requires an evaluation
Okay.
because they may not be getting enough calories or they may have a hormone deficiency or something like that that needs to be evaluated.
Okay. Very good to know. I just figure parents and physicians are often looking at those annual checks or the little school physicals. So that's something that
Absolutely.
they can look at and pay attention to. Any
Yep.
last recommendations, either for coaches in the space with male athletes or parents communicating with them on how to deal with some of these scenarios with their sons and or male athletes just generally on a team?
Yeah, sure. I think the main thing for parents is, especially when they're young, if they want to try something and they say, "Hey, mom, I want to play soccer," or "Hey, dad, I want to play baseball," or whatever, if you have the ability, let them try it. They may love it, they may hate it, but that exploration of how they move and the way their body works in different environments, I think will help them grow a lot as they mature. And they may not think, oh, well, I'm using a skill that I learned in tennis while playing basketball, but their body neuromuscularly will remember that and it will help protect them, I think, in the future. And the other thing is be patient. It's not a fast process. If you remember going through puberty as a kid, it's terrible. Nobody likes doing it. It's uncomfortable. Things are
Yeah.
weird. You don't know who to talk
Yeah.
to. Your voice does all these weird things. And so it's one of those things you just have to be patient, have a line of communication, understand that the kids are probably just as frustrated as you are that they're not getting stronger, but it will happen, some a little earlier, some a little later, but eventually it'll get there. I wish I could say, hey, it'd be great. Everybody at this age will be at this level and everybody's gonna look the same, but
Yeah.
that's not interesting. That's not fun. That's not how life works.
Yep, exactly. I know I'll have parents ask me like, well, when do you think that they're going to be able to put on the muscle if they're doing this? And I'm like, if I knew that, I would be a billionaire, not sitting here
Yeah,
talking to you right now. I
I
mean, if I could crack that code, oh man,
yeah,
everybody'd be coming to see me. So I hear
exactly.
you. And the thing I say to parents is just fuel well, like you said, train well, do what you can do, and then
Yep.
it will work itself out.
Control the things you can, be
Bingo.
smart about it, be safe, fuel, recover, and the rest of it will be what it's going to
Yeah.
be. Not everybody's going to play professional sports, but everybody can gain something from sports. You know, there's no
Agree.
rule that says just because you played only middle school or high school sports, you didn't get something out of it.
Right. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Note to everyone. Not everyone will play, but you can learn something along the
Yeah.
way.
The
So I love
statistics are
that.
just not in your favor. They're
They
really
are
not.
really not. They definitely have another skill.
Yeah. Yeah. Learn to weld.
And
That's what I
even
would do.
then, one good injury could take you out in professional sports. So
Seriously.
don't rely on
Just so
sports,
many examples.
but so many things that they can learn. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your expertise, all your time today. Tell us again about if people that are located in the DFW area, your sports medicine facility.
Right. So I work at the Acclaim Legacy Clinic. It's over
Okay.
on Magnolia and Fort Worth. So if you need something, give me a holler.
Awesome. And we can drop that in the show notes and then provide other resources available if you're interested for your athletes need a sports medicine physician. There are lots of great ones that you can find all over the country. So thank you again, Dr. Mogonye. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.